One of the most encouraging things that I've been seeing over the last couple of years in our industry is a real shift from employers and their advertising agencies using data to justify decisions to instead using data to make decisions. And a great example of that in the last year, there's been much more transparency in our industry between the employers, their applicant tracking systems, their advertising agencies, et cetera, and the job boards. We now get from most of our customers what's typically called the ECPA, the effective cost per application. If an employer spends, say, $1,000 with us, and we send 1,000 clicks to the employer's site, and 100 of them apply, which would be a reasonable number. The effective cost per application is $1,000 divided by 100 applications. So you're spending $10 per application. For a retailer, that's pretty good. If you're hiring engineers and you're a defense contractor, that would be unheard of. That'd be like an amazing So to positions that are more difficult to hire for, nurses, they're going to have a higher average cost per application. We're now getting that data. Some of our customers are dragging their heels. Some of them literally don't have it. Others are loath to share it. But when we get that data from, like, say, an advertising agency or from an employer, we can then do something about it. It's one thing for an employer or their representative to say, you're too expensive or you're really cheap, but you don't know what that really means, even if it's really actually true.
Well, it's context,
or if they're
right?
just making it up.
It's context.
Yeah, but when they tell you ahead of time, hey, the target for this kind of job is $25 per application. Anything less than 20, you guys are doing amazing. Anything more than 30 or 35, we need to talk. And if if it keeps going like that, you're going to lose the business. That's awesome, because then when we start delivering traffic, if we see we're at $42, we know we have a problem, and we really need to figure out what is causing candidates. We're sending the wrong candidates. So we need to figure out then what the right candidates are. On the other hand, if we're at $22 and they're looking for 25, then what we know is we're sending the right candidates. Now we just probably need to send more of them.
Sure.
And that's really helpful. That increased transparency using actual data is a game changer for our industry.
Yeah, I think too, there's definitely a rise in data geeks in the industry in general. We're seeing more and more people who work, a lot of them come out of sourcing and whatnot. They're just more focused on actual data and numbers and metrics. And you're seeing, and I know some employers are assigning data scientists to work on the support talent acquisition for this reason.
Yep. Yeah, I'm seeing on LinkedIn, I'm seeing a lot more people going to work for ad agencies and job distributors, and even in TA functions, where you look at them and it's like, okay, they're you can see from the photo, they're probably 21, 22, 23 years of age. And what's their major? It wasn't HR, it wasn't communications, it was math, statistics, economics. And that's 10 years from now, I think we're going to look back and we're going to like, how is it ever possible that just because a job board ran an ad on a Super Bowl, that they got all that ad revenue if they couldn't produce the results?
Right.
It's got to be data driven. I would really like to see, actually, rather than looking at the average cost per application, I'd like to see the standard be around the effective cost per interview. To me, an interview is a much better metric of success, of quality, than just an application.
Yeah, that we do. I mean, HireClicks, and just full disclosure, HireClicks owns RNN, and we're wholly owned subsidiary, so there's a relationship. There's kind of a bright shiny wall as far as the news and everything else goes. But the approach has been a hierarchy is with every client they sit down with, they say, listen, we want to understand, what do you consider a quality applicant? At
Yeah.
what point in your process, 'cause it's always individual, right? Because you may have 5 steps in your process, you may have 50, but at what point in that process do you say, this person, if they make this far, they must be good? Even if we don't hire them, the fact the board produced someone at this point means they're doing their job right. And you may have, say, 10 people reach that point, one gets hired, and it may be the one person that got hired was produced by a job board that gave you 1,000 applicants. The 9 that weren't came from a job board that gave you 90 applicants. Well, job board B actually did a better job. Job board A got lucky with volume, but job board A swamped your recruiters. So you measure that way too. So there's definitely it's the quality applicant score we signed to every client and job, frankly.
Yeah,
I
definitely understand from like a corporate HR talent acquisition standpoint why their initial reaction would be, well, quality is higher, right? Because that's what we want to do. Right. But just like you articulated, the job board or other source, whether it's an executive recruiting firm, a staffing company, referral program, whatever, right? In a sense, at the end of the day, we're all kind of like a bus, right? You want to get qualified candidates onto the bus and deliver them to your doorstep. But at that point, your talent acquisition function takes over. You've got to do the screening. You've got to do the selection. And if your CEO decides to hire her nephew for that job, it doesn't mean that the job boards and everybody else did a bad job just because there wasn't a hire. It's because your CEO was playing the game of nepotism. But if the recruiter felt like that person was worth the time to do a 10-minute phone interview, then that means that there's like some objective measure of quality. We don't get that kind of data from virtually any of our customers. The effective cost per interview. It's just not a standard that I see being used much. I'm sure there are some organizations that are, and hats off to them because they're leaders.
Yeah, no, we think it's important to us. I keep saying we, because you really do get, and it takes a bit of education with the client, so you understand what we're looking for and why. But it helps kind of guide spend too. So if you're, because even earlier on, even before the hire happens, if you know that the job boards are producing, some people are hitting the quality level consistently, keep investing money there. If a job board or another source is producing no one that gets there, they're making the phone screen, but maybe everyone makes a phone screen, but they're not making the first or second round. Dial back a bit,
right,
and adjust your money there. So even during the process before the hire happened, you can really start kind of fine tuning, because you have a measure or a gate that's earlier in the process before the hire that you can look at and kind of judge from, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
totally. And scale matters too. So one of our customers, I won't name them, and you'll see why, because they have a growth opportunity when it comes to sort of evaluating. They're going through a period where they're really scaling up, and they were hiring. I think over the course of a typical quarter, they were hiring about 50 people per 3 months. So pretty decent hiring volume, but not anything to write home about compared to a lot of companies. I mean, Amazon probably hires 50 people in an hour, but
that's so low.
Yeah, that could be. But these guys are hiring something like 50 people every 3 months, and they want to increase that to 5,000 people every 3 months, and they want to do that in the next 3 to 6 months. Well, that's crazy exponential growth. They can do it, but they're gonna have to understand, and they're trying to come to grips with it, that it's going to cost them a lot more per hire to hire more people. What they've been doing so far is picking fruit from the bottom of the tree, the lowest of the low-hanging fruit. And it's pretty easy to reach up to an apple tree and grab that apple, right? But when you start going further up that tree, you need to have a ladder, and your systems have to be different. So they told me that their effective cost per application in 2020, last year, was 50 cents, which is super cheap.
Wow.
And the reason is that most of it was just organic. It was free. Mm-hmm. Well, if you want to stay at 50 hires a quarter, you can continue to pay 50 cents per effective application. But if you want to go to 5,000 people, you're probably going to have to pay $20 per application for the kind of job that they have available. That's something that, if your background was economics, statistics, math, whatever, right, that would be intuitive to you. But if you've been in a more sort of traditional HR role, growing up with post and pray, it's hard to kind of grasp that. Most businesses talk about economies of scale. The more you buy, the cheaper it is. When it comes to lead generation, getting people to apply to your jobs, the opposite of true. The opposite is true. There's diseconomies of scale. It's harder and harder and harder, more and more and more expensive to find those candidates when you scale up.
And it makes sense. It really does. It really does.
Yeah.
It's have you read The Mythical Man Month by Brooks?
Mm-mm.
It's a classic intro to computer science text that most, but I assume it's still being read. Your first year math and computer science majors read, and it's basically the idea is that there used to be this theory that if a man month is basically how you measure software development. And it's sexist, I know. The term has changed over time, but the idea was you'd measure, well, if it takes 5 people to build this kind of amount of software per month, if we put 10 in, it should be cut in half. Put 15 in, it's a third, by third, et cetera. But that's not true, because the more you put in, the more complex it gets.
Yes.
Hiring is harder. People run into each other. And you only do so much at a time. So it's, to your point, it doesn't scale up. It actually scales down.
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive, but it's the same idea.
Right. And that's okay, because there are other benefits,
of course,
right? So if you've got 3 developers and one is kind of the team lead, and so you've got 3 people basically coding almost full time. Mm-hmm. You don't need to have a manager.
Right.
But now you want to have, say, 6 developers, 8 developers, you're definitely going to have a manager, and that person is not going to be coding.
Of course, yes, exactly. Because to your point, there's training, there's hiring, there's management, and it's just they're also tripping over each other.
Right. And then you need, you need Toby from the office, in HR, who's then just, a really nice, really competent guy, and that's why his boss dislikes him so much.
I love the fact that we can bond over TV shows like this, and you're Canadian, so obviously you're a big fan of Schitt's Creek, I'd assume. So, which is still one of my gorgeous television. Anyways, so not to tangent this. So that's interesting. Yeah, I think I do think that, to your point, it was looking back a bit, we're seeing smarter and smarter, or not smarter, but more educated consumers who are getting more sophisticated with understanding how traffic works, how to measure it, how to push back on job boards too, and they know what they're looking for.
Yeah, it's not the beauty pageant that it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Thank goodness. Mm-hmm. It's not. The questions that we get asked now by potential customers are much more well thought out. I think they had a lot of BS handed to them for a lot of years by some of the biggest players. Chief amongst those is, how much traffic do you have? We still hear that one. My answer to that is, who cares?
Right.
If we have 5 million people a month using our site and nobody applies to your job, how does that help you? If we have 50,000 people a month using our site and you get every single person that you need from us, isn't that better?
It's quality traffic. It's quality.
Yeah. The whole how much traffic do you had was a brilliant way for Monster to market itself, because they had way more traffic than anybody else did back in 20 years ago. And so that was a chief selling proposition for them. So they used that, and they convinced a whole generation of customers that traffic is all that matters. Now there's sort of a new generation, and sometimes it's the older, more experienced people who just are looking at this in a better way. And they're looking at it from more like metrics like effective cost per application. Mm-hmm. And hopefully if we talk again in a couple of years, it'll be effective cost per interview. That kind of thing matters a lot more than just how many eyeballs are there. It's rare now, if we're talking to a customer, it's rare that they don't have at least a basic understanding of pay-per-click. 5 years ago, almost none of them understood pay-per-click at all. And that's also great. It aligns our interests more with the employers. If we're paid per click, we're paid for delivering to them a candidate, hopefully of good quality. And that's better than just running an ad. You run an ad, it's like, what does that mean? Even to the extent like sending a lot of clicks, it's not that great of a metric because that's just quantity over quality.
And
but at least it's getting us closer.
Yeah, and you still have the bot problem and everything else too. But it's, I think it's the analogy is you could drive by a car lot, and if it's full of people, they must be doing amazing because there's lots of folks in there, but everyone there's looking to buy a bicycle. But from a distance, it looks like they're really busy, and maybe they go for a test drive because they're there, and why not go for a test drive in a car? But I can afford a bicycle, but while I'm here, I'll drive your Lamborghini. But they're never going to actually buy it. So the conversion point matters, and understanding and seeing that happen and getting a bit deeper into it. So actually going, you have access, if you can get access to the business manager's office to see what deals are being closed, what cars are being sold, then you're measuring success.
Yeah, you're getting closer and closer and closer to
what matters.
Is their success the same as my success?
Right.
And yeah, that definitely matters a lot.
So we're getting really geeky here. I hope we haven't lost people. So, sorry. But that said, so I did want to kind of jump into just because we're in this very, I guess, interesting time in our society, in our global society, frankly, our civilization, and that's, there's lots of changes because of that. Everyone's home, everyone's isolated, everyone's talking like this on Zoom. Well, maybe Stephen, maybe I'll see you this year. I don't think I will, but maybe I will in person. Just because, yeah, right. But campus is always an interesting problem in general for recruiting. It's got to be fascinating this year. So what's happening with in 2021 with campus recruiting? What changes have you seen? How are people adapting? What are they looking for?
Yeah, I think it truly is fascinating. I mean, whether you're like a data person or not a data person, there's absolutely no doubt that there is probably the biggest change in college and university recruiting, campus recruiting, call it what you want. There's the biggest change going on right now that there ever has been. And it's really flying under the radar for most people. So until a year ago, it was pretty well recognized that the vast majority of college students and recent grads went to work for large employers. There's this belief, it's not true, but there's a belief that most people work for small businesses. If you take out all of the businesses where it's just one person, where they're just actually working for themselves, if you take those out, most people actually work for medium and large size businesses. And it's even more so with college students and recent grads. Far more of them go to work for a Walmart or a Target than for a little startup in San Francisco. The largest employers overwhelmingly hired most of those students and recent grads through their internship programs. And that wasn't true 10, 20 years ago, but it's been very true the last 5 years. If you're a student and you graduate without a job, it is far less likely that you're going to find a good career-related job just applying online versus, your roommate who found a similar job through her internship. Internship was that was the path to success, both for the employer and the candidate. The vast majority of interns were hired on campus, recruiters, hiring managers, flying around the country, wining and dining professors, taking career service office people to football games and all sorts of stuff to curry favor. And the average cost per hire for a student, according to NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, was about $6,400. That's a lot of money to pay for a typical 20, 21-year-old with little to no work experience who is working towards a college degree, probably will graduate with one, but not necessarily. And there's really no proof that that person is going to be able to do a good job for you. They have no demonstrated ability to stay with an employer for more than a few months. you're taking a big chance by hiring those people, but that's the way college and university recruiting worked. Why did it work that way? Because it always had worked that way. There was this huge inertia. College recruiting until 2000 was pretty much the same as it was in 1952. You just drove around, flew around the country, and went campus to campus to campus to campus. If you needed to hire more students, you went to more campuses. And very few employers would even count their travel and staff costs in their effective cost per hire. So they'd say, oh, well, the school charged us $500 to go to career fair and we hired 2 people. Cost per hire is $250. It's like, no, you flew 4 people halfway across the country. They spent 4 days out of the office. They stayed at a Hilton at $175 a night. They rented cars. You gave them $120 a day for meals. And they also went to a San Francisco 49ers game with 3 professors, and that was $2,000. So you're actually paying $8,000, per hire. And there was a lot of inertia built up and a lot of feather bedding. A lot of these people that were doing all that traveling really liked it. And so they were really reluctant to change it. COVID comes along, and COVID basically says, you're not going to fly anywhere. But these companies still needed to hire people. So they ended up shifting from flying people around the country, mostly starting in the fall of 2020, to doing it almost all online. And lo and behold, cost per hire go from $6,400 to about a tenth of that. I think what we're going to see next fall, when campuses really start opening up again, you're going to have most students at the school rather than working remotely from their parents' basement halfway across the country. I think what we're going to see is the pendulum shifting back some, but not nearly all the way. You will have more employers going on campus than in 2020. You'll have more employers hiring more people on campus in 2020, but nowhere near what 2019 had and before that. It is faster and cheaper by far to hire that student through a job board, through an online career fair, through referral programs, whatever, than to go on campus, because there's far less staff time and there's no travel cost involved. Your coworker, Kara Yarnot, when she had her own company, she hosted a conference, and I was moderating a panel discussion. One of the panelists worked for, I think it was Lockheed Martin. He was a university recruiter. We were talking about on-campus versus online. And he said that their average cost of hiring somebody online is 1/10 of what it was through going out to campuses. And so I'm thinking, okay, now he's going to drop the other shoe. Now he's going to say, however, we do most of our hiring on campus because the quality is higher. And he kind of says, basically, like, don't tell anybody I said this. My words, not his, but the quality is better online. And I thought for sure I had misheard him. So I asked him the same question again, but in a different way. And he's like, no, the quality is better online. It's like, okay, why are you saying that? Because if we hire somebody on campus, chances are they're an elite student from an elite school in a highly sought after major, computer science from MIT, and they are probably going to be with us for a year or 2. If we hire somebody online instead of on campus, then they probably go to a second or third tier school, and they'll be with us for 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. And so their productivity is higher. Also, if we hire on campus, it undermines our diversity hiring efforts. Because if we hire from 20 schools, everybody has gone, they've lived in the same metros, they've gone to the same schools, they've had the same textbooks, they've had the same professors, they all have the same way of thinking. If you open it up and you hire most people online, now you're hiring from 2,000 schools. So by definition, it's more diverse.
Sure, it makes sense.
it blew me away.
Economically too, because you may be a genius, but you can't afford to go to MIT Harvard without a scholarship. So you're going to go to a school that maybe isn't as well known, but you are high quality. You just can't be found because you're not at the right spot. You're not in the right place geographically. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, I think what we're going to see if your company is trying to hire, say, 200 interns this year. 2 years ago, you would have gone on campus, you would have hired 190 of them from, say, 20 schools. Mm-hmm. This coming year, I think most of those companies will go from, say, 20 schools to 10. And instead of hiring 190 of the 200, they'll hire maybe 50 on campus and 150 online. So I think, again, I think that pendulum's going to switch back some, but not all. I'm biased. Clearly that helps us. But there are also other companies out there that it helps too.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think you're incorrect either. I do think that the return's going to be a lot more hybrid, for all kinds of reasons and all kinds of roles and situations. And I do think campuses will definitely be one of them. I mean, I'm thinking about the big four. They're accounting firms at heart, even if they do consulting and stuff now, et cetera, and systems work. But they're at heart, they're accounting firms, and they're always measuring dollars.
Yes.
And quality. And if they're seeing that the quality doesn't dip or even possibly improves and the costs go down, it will become very hard for campus to get budget back to travel as much as they were.
Right.
Because all of a sudden there's data, and that's hard to argue against too. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. But if you've got 50 people in your university recruiting department, and so, you're the university recruiting director, and you've got basically 50 people who are reporting up to you, it goes against your self-interest to go down to a team of 10.
Oh, for sure.
And so it's not going to be, generally, it's not going to be the university relations director in a big four who's going to drive that change. It's going to be her boss. Yes. It's going to be the senior vice president of human resources, who's going to say, wait a sec, we spent $20 million last year flying people around to campuses. And in 2020-21 school year, you hired just as many people with $2 million. Tell me again, why should we be spending $18 million so we can have your team rack up a bunch of frequent flyer mileage? I think that there's going to be a reckoning for most of those big organizations. They make those decisions in March, April, May. I think, the sister company HireClicks and the other ad agencies and whatever, I think in a couple months, you're going to be hearing a lot about that.
Truth to be told, we've been hearing a bit about that. There are things coming in. Because it's just, again, it's data and numbers. And if I'm a VP of TA, as I've been, and I see, I've got a fixed budget, and I'm like, wait a minute, I just regained $18 million. I can put that on technology. I could do things with I can't experience. I can do a lot more all of a sudden. So all of a sudden you're fighting to keep that to yourself for something else. So interesting.
How about investing that money in some really great assessments, so that whether that candidate is white, black, brown, female, male, citizen, green card, northern state, southern state, community college, Ivy League college, whatever, you put them through the assessment. And you see, can you do the work? And if you can do the work, here's a job offer. I mean, wouldn't that be a better way of hiring than flying people around and saying, oh, Martin, you go to a snazzy school. Well, it would be prestigious for us to hire you, and hopefully you'll be productive. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's not. It's funny when I started recruiting a few years ago. I'll just say that.
Like six, right after you graduated from college, right?
6 months ago. I'm 25. I'm 25. Okay. But it was one of my colleagues, manager. I started with this in the staffing agency. She was talking about hiring kids out of college for clients, and she said the issue is it's like a stick of dynamite. It's potential energy. You don't know what's going to happen until you light and the fuse goes, and you see what happens, how big the explosion is. But now with data analytics, you can start understanding. This will make this big of a boom.
Yeah.
We think the stick of dynamite can do exactly this, and you're generally pretty accurate too. So interesting.
Yeah, and definitely do not trust me with a stick of dynamite.
Same here. We're all better off. Well, listen, Stephen, this has been a good chat. Anything else that I haven't asked you want to add about what's going on, or anything we haven't covered?
The only other thing, just really briefly, that I
Sure.
that I also see changing a lot in the next few years, would be what a lot of the best talent acquisition people have taught me over the last few years, and that is a real shift by employers to becoming more what they call school agnostic. They don't really care for most jobs. They don't really care what school you went to. There definitely are some, right? You want to go work for one of the big four accounting firms. You go to, if you went to Wharton, you're going to have connections and that's going to help them land business. I get that. But for the vast majority of jobs out there, they just care that you're college educated. If you're in our niche. So I think that we're going to see a lot more employers hire a lot more people from community colleges and from state schools. That's going to put downward pressure on higher education pricing. And that's definitely a really good
As
thing.
the father of teenagers, please.
What you should do is you should do what my wife did 27 years ago, and that is marry a Canadian, because then 2 out of your 3 kids go to a Canadian school, and it was $2,500 a year.
I married a German. So half German,
even better.
with passports. So, and I think it's like $40 a year in Germany for university or something crazy like that.
Well, that goes towards buying the Stein with the cap.
Exactly. You got to reinvest it somewhere, Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm like, please, sprechen die Deutsch. Come on, kids. It's beautiful over there. But I'm with you. I do think you're right. And I'm hearing more about students who are dropping out of 4-year colleges because of COVID. And what's the point of virtual school for $60,000 a year? And they're going to community colleges or they're going to state schools because the experience is gone. It's the education. And to your point, the degree from an Ivy League school sounds great. It sounds exciting, and you will get, I imagine, better tools to learn from, and possibly better professors, and maybe some of your fellow students are more engaged in learning, possibly. But it's not. Yeah, exactly. That's the myth, right? That's the shiny myth of the Ivy League. I don't really buy it. I think it was really where you buy our connections. I think, to your point about Wharton.
Yeah.
But the actual degree, I as a recruiter, I never really cared that much about. Yeah, I some hiring managers who really they were degree snobs, but even that's kind of gone away because we're seeing now that you can find hidden gems from all kinds of places. That some of the brilliant colleagues I've ever had never went to college or went to a small community college or a school I've never heard of, but they were incredible, and they still are. So
absolutely, we recommend to friends and family all the time that your 17, 18-year-old who's trying to pick a school. There is just no way that more than 1 out of 100 of them have any clue as to what they want to be doing when they're even 30. And spending $250,000 on a college education, if you don't know what you want to do, take a gap year. Go and work, go travel when COVID isn't a thing anymore. Go to a community college. The community college, I think the quality of education, the quality of teaching is almost always far superior to what you get in a traditional 4-year school. Traditional 4-year school, half of your classes in your first year, you have 300, 400, 500 kids in a classroom. And a bunch of those, there's a TV up at the front of the room or a grad student teaching. You can't tell me that's quality teaching. And this year with COVID, the whole learning remote thing, it's crazy that people are spending $60,000 a year to learn on Zoom when there's probably better education available on YouTube for the same topic. I mean, I get the fact they're basically buying a degree, hoping that degree will get them a job that will eventually pay for that education. But if they can pay a quarter of what they did for that education, they should.
Yeah, I mean,
and there are a lot of really big Fortune 1000 companies out there that have realized that, and that's really exciting. It's really opening up in rather than legislation or warm fuzzies like you should hire this diverse candidate because it's the right thing to do. It is, and that's important. But if there's also a really good economic reason for that, that's also good. Employers should also be advocating for this, because if you hire someone who's got a 250,000 debt load and you're paying them, the typical 40 grand a year for a college grad, there's a really, really good chance that you're going to lose that person in a year or two, because they can get a $2,000 raise over the course of a year, a few bucks an hour, by moving across the street.
Well, nothing mentioned that debt load is stress.
Yeah.
So you've got a very stressed employee who's panicking about money.
Yeah.
And it's about they're flight risk anyways, but they're also stressed about money, and they can't afford to live a life as well.
Right.
They're not able to meet friends, do things. They're just miserable.
Yep.
Yeah.
They should do what in my generation, what we did in college, and that is invest that money in a good beer.
Yeah. or two. No, well, I mean, you went to school in Canada. I went to school near Canada, so beer was important. So
it's the second national sport.
Keeps you warm at night. It's important. Well, listen, Steve, it's been wonderful. I really love catching up with you in general. Yeah, I do want to see you in person someday. So hopefully we'll get through all this and we can talk again. In the meantime, everyone, thanks for hanging with us. Steve, any closing words or anything like that, or just
just if anybody has any questions, they like what I had to say, they think I'm an idiot, whatever, connect with me on LinkedIn, shoot me an email. Steven, Steven @collegerecruiter.com. Waste your time on Twitter, well, whatever.
Send you a gram, a snap, a talk.
Smoke signals, small explosive devices left outside the door, whatever works.
Now it got dark. All right. All right, man. Thanks everyone again. Steven, good chatting with you, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Martin.